And James Hale, their butler, said that never in my life have I worked so hard. On my arrival, I found house telephones, not only in the butler's pantry, not only in my bedroom, but in my bathroom and lavatory as well. It was clear that when the Duchess insisted on instant communication with the staff at all times, she meant at all times. People, are we hearing this? He arrives to the house to find that there is literally a phone everywhere he could possibly be. The man can't even escape and go to the bathroom without her calling him up being, James, we're gonna need blank, blank, and blank. What kind of a wild, egotistical maniac says we're gonna install telephones in the butler's bathroom because I don't care if he's sitting on the toilet. He's gonna be ready to do the next thing when he hops back up. Good morning, how are you? Welcome to another episode of the original Harry and Meghan, where we are reviewing Traitor King, and it's all about Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson and his complete fall from grace when he chose to run after a very strange woman and abdicate the throne. So it has been a wild ride. I thought that I knew about this couple. I mean, I'd seen like a couple of documentaries about them and read a few things, and so I thought that there probably wasn't going to be anything particularly new. I just sort of thought that it would be a great follow-up to the other two books we've done on this channel. The first one being Spare by Prince Harry, and then Revenge, so we could get a better idea of who Meghan was, or is. And so many times in the comments, people were saying, they're just like Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. And I thought that same thing. I thought, well, there are some parallels. The parallels are many. So I think this was a great choice. And if you haven't had a chance to go back and watch the other episodes of this book, I highly recommend it just because it's shocking. There's just so much in this book that I cannot believe I've never heard before. I don't know every single thing about the royal family. No, I'm like learning as I go. But I thought I knew some of the broader strokes about this particular couple, but there's a lot that I'm learning, particularly about their relationship with the Nazis and even their relationship with each other and their relationship with really all of their relationships seem very fraught with drama, seem very fraught with like manipulation and like just shady dealings. And last chapter we learned all about Edward VIII's many illegitimate children. We learned that he was also having an affair with his male cousin, so his sexuality is a huge question mark. It was also really surprising because I've always thought that he could not have children. That's always been the rumor about him, that he could not have children, and that Wallis Simpson couldn't have children. She was also older when she got with him, so I don't think anybody expected her to have a kid. But David, the rumor has always been that he just could not have children. And I'm wondering now if that was a rumor that was started purposely because he actually had quite a few of them and all across the face of the earth. So it was an interesting chapter. If you've not had a chance to go back and listen to that one, I would highly recommend it. I was shocked on every page. And it wasn't like a, slow leading up into the crazy. It was crazy from start to finish last chapter. So go back and watch it if you haven't. This chapter is called Countdown to War, but what it really is about is kind of like this chapter is all about what they're doing to distract themselves from the fact that they have nothing to do. Their lives sound terrible. And it's all about spending money, and it's all about living lavishly, and it's all about making their whole life a production. They are so nitpicky about every single detail in their life because they've got nothing to worry about. They've got nothing to do except worry about what exactly is on the menu tonight and worry about every single placement of every single object in their house. They're worried about driving their servants, into the ground. They are incredibly hard to work for. They're running through staff because people don't want to work for them because they're terrible. Does this remind us of anybody? Truly, this is the original Harry and Meghan. And on this chapter specifically, their personalities are just mirroring each other constantly back and forth. It's hard to remember that I'm not reading about Harry and Meghan. In fact, I've had to go back and cut out where I accidentally called him Harry or I accidentally called her Megan, because they're just very similar in their behavior, and they're very similar in their approach, and they're very similar in their entitlement, and in the idea that people owe them something, and that their choices, they're both parties are very angry at the royal family for choices that they personally made. So, you know, it's, if the Harry and Meghan storyline has been amusing to you, this one will be also, because it's unbelievable. None of us would ever function like this. And to think that there are people out there who feel like it's 110% okay to just go through life expecting that everyone should, you know, bend over backwards for you and to be all butt sore when they don't. It's just wild. Anyway, there was one correction in the last episode, and you know, it's one of those things where you're like, I should listen to my instinct. I made a mistake in the last chapter, and numerous people wanted to let me know that I had made the mistake. I mean, it's not shocking. It was a pretty big mistake. I had accidentally said that the brother that was being blackmailed by the gigolo was King George. Now, even as those words fell from my mouth, I was like, is it though? You know, because I don't know all of Edward's brothers. I'm going to be 100% with you. I know Bertie. I know the king. And I thought, in my mind as I was reading, I was like, okay, he had a brother named George, but King George, is that the same guy? Now, instead of saying, hey guys, who is this? Or stopping and looking it up, I just was like, oh, it must be the same person. And the reason I thought that, and this is, I mean, it's on me. I'm not blaming Andrew Loney. By the way, somebody else said I was pronouncing his name wrong. I'm not blaming Edward Loney. I'm just saying sometimes he'll throw names in, and it's actually a huge detail that if I was the writer, I would expound upon. And he just like will throw a name in there, and you're supposed to make the inferences. You're supposed to remember the connection. And so I thought, he just said his brother George. Am I supposed to infer that he means the king? Although he probably would have said King George. Anyway, it's not the king. It's another brother who also has the name George, who did not take on the name of George as the king, but who was by birth George. So the king was not being blackmailed by a gigolo, and I'm sorry that I did not take the pause to find out what that really meant and what that relationship really was. I did make mistakes, so thank you for correcting me. Even as I spoke the words, even as the words came out of my mouth, I thought, am I saying this correctly? Is it King George? And it was not. So anyway, just his brother. But you know what? That's weird. That's weird that both he and his brother are being blackmailed by all of these, you know, in all of these bisexual relationships. What was going on in that family? Okay, long intro, but let's get back to the chapter. Chapter 7, called Countdown to War. And again, what this really is how are Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson playing king and queen because they have nothing else to do. It says here that in October 1938, the lease having expired at their chateau, the Windsors took a 10-year lease of a mansion, which was a 4-story townhouse on a small corner lot overlooking a paved square and surrounded by a tall iron fence and thick hedges. It's interesting that they would go to a 4-story townhouse after living out in the country on that sprawling estate. But, you know, Wallis had always wanted to live in Paris. She didn't want to live out in the middle of the countryside, and so maybe this was their compromise, that because they were definitely not going back to England, which is what she had wanted, they compromised and went back to Paris. The imposing front door led into a pillared entrance hall with a black and white Carrara marble floor and white pillars, from which led several houses used by the secretaries and detectives. You've got a whole floor of your house for the detectives? Okay. There was a small lift to their apartments. On the left and on the right, a curved white marble staircase with green carpet that led to 4 interlocking reception rooms built around a big central landing, a formal dining room, a small salon, dining room, and a lounge room known as the banquet room. There were 16 servants in this 4-story townhouse for the 2 of them. You need 16 different people to wait on you hand and foot and make the magic happen when it's just the 2 of you? What are you doing all day, Wallis? You know, you can't condescend down the stairs and whip up a couple of quick breakfasts for you and the Duke? Is it just beyond you to think about making a little lunch, little dinner? You got no kids to watch. You got nothing to do. I mean, it's like, what in the world did she need 16 servants for? She doesn't work. She doesn't have anybody to care or tend for. Why in the world did they need to employ that many people? The waste of resources in this house is mind-blowing. So they've got their 16 servants. They've got a butler. He was known as the butler with the golden voice, and he actually used to work for Charles Bedaux. Interesting. They had a French chef, obviously. They had an Austrian valet. They had a chauffeur. They had French and English footmen. They had 2 English housemaids. And for Wallace, a English chauffeur and a Swiss lady's maid. They've got helpers from across the globe. And it's just wild that they would need this much help. What do you need a Swiss lady's maid for? I mean, probably she was ironing all the clothes, since there was like 17 bajillion wardrobe changes a day. But you got 2 housemaids, you got footmen, you've got chauffeur. I mean, they each had their own chauffeur. You couldn't like share the same chauffeur. This is also was weird to me. Okay, so Wallace rode around in a car, driven by her chauffeur, and on the Buick were the initials WWS for Wallace Warfield Simpson. And they were etched in small plain gold letters in a tiny diamond-shaped frame on one of the doors. Anybody else think that it's weird that she wanted to put her monogram on the door as Wallace Warfield Simpson? But she's married now. Why is she still holding on to her ex-husband's last name? She is divorced. She's now remarried. If I married somebody and like if I was a guy and I'd abdicated the throne for this woman and then she continued to walk around and be known as Wallace Warfield Simpson when in actuality she had changed her name before we had even gotten married. She dropped the Simpson, but now that we are married, she's still driving around in a car that says Wallace Simpson on it. Wouldn't that feel a little bit like, my soul is prickled by that? I'm bothered by that. Especially in this day and age, where I feel like the whole idea of not taking your husband's name wasn't as a debated topic, like you just did, and especially, like I said, because she had, before they got married, went back to her old name and had dropped the Simpson. So what is up with this now? Is it because that's what she was known as? She was known as Wallace Simpson to the world, and so she wanted to let people know Wallace Simpson's rolling up, I don't know. But I mean, also she's now known to the world as the Duke's wife. So it seems like, why don't you want that to be your moniker? I can never begin to understand, but am I the only one who thinks that's weird? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? I think that's weird. Okay. Well, protection was a big issue, as you can imagine. I mean, who have we heard prattling on about protection? I mean, how many times has Harry waddled out to cry and say he wasn't getting the protection that he deserved and that he needed, and that everybody needed to stop and help him and protect him, and that the police departments of every city he ever entered needed to drop everything and come to his defense? Well, apparently this was also an issue here, although they were able to get the British and French to send police officers in their constant defense. It was a big issue. Several British and French officers always stayed with them, even when the Duke played golf. When the couple lunched or dined in restaurants or with friends, or they paid visits to courtiers, milliners, jewelers, or antique shops, an officer always waited outside. A French officer was always standing guard in front of their home. Again, the resources that are being handed over to this couple. Why is that town having to allocate police resources to this couple? If you want protective officers, you need to go and find a way to make that happen, Captain. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is not working out for me with that town's resources being allocated to this couple. No. The new house became their project, a way of demonstrating their love for each other. Demonstrating their love for each other, or finding something in this blessed world to do, because they had nothing to do. This sounds ridiculous. It says here that Wallace spent all her time tirelessly searching for exactly the right furniture, rugs, material, lamps, and bibelots. I don't know what a bibelot is. Who wants to tell me? It's spelled Bibelots. What does that mean? It's also italicized, so I'm assuming it's a foreign word. She came to know immediately every antique shop, large and small, in Paris, recollected Diana Hood, the secretary. Everything that concerned the house was of absorbing interest to the Duchess. Besides the furniture and bibelots, she collected fine porcelain, glassware, silver, and linen. She thought nothing of paying £8,000 for a single Misson figure, or $30,000 for a pair of canary diamonds, generally bought with cash to avoid tax. They were real big on avoiding that tax. Real big on it. That's why they hadn't gone back to England, because they were going to have to pay taxes, God forbid it. The couple ate little during the day. Obviously. Have you seen the two of them? Stick figures. Stick figures. And in fact, look at this dress real quick. You guys, I was looking for pictures the other day online for my thumbnails on the clips. And just look at this picture of Wallace Simpson. When you are so flat-chested that you need to put tassels on the front of your dress to mimic the look of a couple of breasts, we need to reconsider our fashion choices. Anyway, they ate little during the day. Both of them stick figures. Both of them look like they're just wasting away. And I know they both thought that that was a look. I mean, they both really thought that was a thing. You know, he was always extremely careful, always working out, always exercising, always trying, you know, you can't gain that weight. And you know what she always said? You can't be too thin or too rich. Doesn't exist. You know, and so clearly she was wasting away to nothing. So both of them, they don't eat during the day. They're saving it up for the night. The Duke preferred to spend the lunch hour on the golf course, knowing that few Frenchmen would venture out at such a time. Yeah, because they're being normal and eating. Instead, Hood remembered that he might have a light brunch, which consisted of stewed fruit or open fruit tart served with cream, accompanied by digestive biscuits and weak tea. You know, people really dislike it when I make my little comments about, well, I think a man should, ... Everyone's like, everybody's different. I know everyone's different. I know. But a man who wants to skip all day and not eat and, you know, satiates himself with digestive biscuits and weak tea. I mean, the absolute definition of a Casper milquetoast. Eat some food. Be a man. Sit down to a plate of eggs for breakfast. I mean, it's like, what is this like? I'll take some weak tea and a digestive biscuit. It's like, I just, like, everything about him, I just am, like, grossed out by him. He was, like, apparently this big heartthrob. Like, there was all these women who were like, oh, Wallace Simpson's so lucky. I'm like, is she, though? Is she? I mean, I just, Now, I think we can all agree that the man knew how to dress himself. And I do love a man who can dress himself. I will say that. I love a man who can put himself together. That's great. So I give him all the props for that. But just, like, his ways, walking around with his little dog and his like digestive biscuits and his weak tea. I'm just like, grow a pair already. You know, just like liking to be bossed around by Wallace Simpson. I was like, oh, yuck. I'm glad you weren't the king, because I just don't think he has it. I think a king needs to be strong and, you know, just masculine and like ready to take on the world and do the hard things and make the hard choices and make the hard calls. You know, he's not over there nibbling on his digestive biscuit and sipping his weak tea. Anyway. Their focus was on the evening, giving 2 dinner parties each week and out most nights. Can you imagine the planning of doing 2 dinner parties every week and you're out every other night? I mean, I would say that I am hostingly challenged. I'm not one of those people that is just like an amazing hostess. I wish that I was, deeply and profoundly. I know it's something that I need to cultivate as a grown woman. It needs to be something that I work on. I'm not. So the idea of hosting 2 times in 1 week dinner parties, I feel weighed down by the very thought of it. I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I'd be working myself up 6 months in order to have 1 dinner party. Anyway, so she's got 2 going every week and then they're out all the time. And James Hale, their butler, said that never in my life have I worked so hard. He said, the Duchess, I soon discovered, graded the villa, not so much as a home, but as the stage on which to present an unending show of hospitality and entertainment. She was the producer. I was her stage manager. On my arrival, I found house telephones, not only in the butler's pantry, not only in my bedroom, but in my bathroom and lavatory as well. It was clear that when the Duchess insisted on instant communication with the staff at all times, she meant at all times. People, are we hearing this? He arrives to the house to find that there is literally a phone everywhere he could possibly be. The man can't even escape and go to the bathroom without her calling him up being, James, we're going to need blank, blank, and blank. What kind of a wild, egotistical maniac says we're going to install telephones in the butler's bathroom because I don't care if he's sitting on the toilet. He's going to be ready to do the next thing when he hops back up. That's crazy. And this is Megan in the emails. Remember, everyone was like, Megan would email me at 5 o'clock in the morning. How dare she? And I even said at the time, well, yeah, but an email doesn't mean you have to do it when she sends it. She's up. She's just letting you know. Now, of course, none of us ever saw these emails, so none of us know what the tone actually was. She could have been like, why aren't you up? Get your skinny butt over here. I need X, Y, and Z. Who even knows what those emails said? But it was enough that people were saying, I feel incredibly scared and frightened because she always wants me to be doing something and I never feel like I'm doing enough, and she's always angry and she's always mad. Okay, that makes perfect sense that they would feel that way, especially given we never saw what the emails were. And enough people have said she was, she drove us, with a horsewhip. Still not as bad as calling somebody on the telephone while they're sitting on the toilet. I mean, it's not even, this was so, obviously, this was the day before cell phones. All of us have a phone with us when we go to the bathroom. If we're honest with ourselves, it's always with us. But that's a far cry from having a phone installed with the explicit purpose of, I will be bothering you in your bathroom. That's why there is a phone there, And to be like, for Wallace Simpson to think, I have to be able to contact him at any moment, that it is a necessity for that phone to be installed in his bathroom because I cannot manage if I cannot get to him at every moment of the day. I would not stick around for that job. I don't mind working hard. I will work my fingers to the bone. I would not be bossed like this. This is ridiculous. They were demanding and not always popular employers in the greatest understatement of the year. And then we have, again, a sentence that could be stated for either couple, either Harry or Meghan or Wallace and David. Listen to this. A dropped plate, a careless intrusion, or a slip in attentiveness could be counted upon to bring a swift dressing down, followed often by a sacking. Remember Charles Murphy, who worked for the Windsors. The hours were long, praise was scanty. It is doubtful that any household staff in all Paris was driven as hard as the one that served the Windsors. We could pick that sentence up and drop it right on the heads of Harry and Meghan. The hours were long and the praise was scanty. How similar does that sound to so many of the things that we've heard from the people who have slaved for Harry and Meghan these many years? Each morning, Wallace discussed the menus for the day with the chef. She examined these minutely, sometimes approving and sometimes altering or adding to his suggestions. Y'all, he was a famous French chef. Wallace Simpson and her skinny little hands running down the list of things he's planning on doing. No, I don't think that's going to work. I don't want to have... That's too heavy. Oh no, the Duke won't have that. No, he likes light food, plain food. No, we're not going to serve that. Now, can you just imagine having her in your ear all the day, telling you what you can and can't do? And you're like, I'm a famous French chef. In the city of Paris, where you've chosen to live, I will decide what's going on that supper table. You don't know. You don't even eat. That's the thing that would really bother me. If this was a person who did not even savor and love food, who looked at food as a prop and then wanted to come to me and tell me what I was going to serve on that table when I was here to bring the flavors. Can you even imagine? I would loathe and despise that. Their secretary explained it in this way. She said, in every branch of expenditure, Wallace inquired exhaustively. Household accounts were kept with scrupulous exactness in accordance with the cash book and the ledger system into which Mr. Carter had initiated me that day at Buckingham Palace. In the ledger, payments were grouped under various headings, which were subdivided in such minute detail that a close watch could be kept on every kind of disbursement. Can you imagine being in charge of the books at this house? Every little penny had to be accounted for in the most exact way. And I'm not saying we can't keep some exact books. We should be. We shouldn't be sloppy with what we have. There should be excellence in all things. But this wild and complicated system of subheadings and other headings and groupings and every little jot and tittle to be accounted for, and then knowing that there's just a couple of, little skinny monsters breathing behind your back being like, are you doing everything exactly the way we've told you to do it? It would just be a nightmare. With little else to occupy them, the devil was in the detail. A truer sentence never spoken. They decided the exact shade and size of the personal notepaper and how it should be engraved, Hood later wrote. The same for their menu cards. Their luggage labels were printed according to their own instructions. Together they chose the designs and colorings of their Christmas cards. I feel like carrying this much would be exhausting. Like, I don't even feel like I have the capacity in me to care about that kind of minutia. Now, I know that I am kind of a big picture person. My husband is a detail-oriented person. And on that point, we often, I think, differ in the way that we would deal with things, much to his frustration. Because to me, I'm just like, but did it get done? Okay, that's good. I've got 1,000 things to think about. All of these little children to always be, caring and concerning for. Like, I don't have the time and the will to carry about these things. And I think that their lack of jobs, their lack of family, their lack of really anything meaningful led to the capacity to care about the size of the notebook paper and the exact color of it. And, where every little thing was placed in the house and every tiny little detail. Because if your whole life is a play and your whole life is presentation, it's going to matter excruciatingly how it all works out. Now, I feel like this is the precursor to the whole Instagram age, in that she knew that everyone was going to be watching how she did this, and so everything, which had to be Instagram worthy, to use that term, decades before anyone would have thought of it, but it's the same conceptual way of living. I need to make sure that everything could be a picture for content. I need to make sure that everything is beautiful so that people will think that I live a beautiful life. And if you're going and having people, 2 times a week into your home for big dinner parties, or you're going out into the world and presenting yourself, the cameras are watching, even if they didn't have the paparazzi in the same way that they do now, people are paying attention to what you're doing. People are talking about what you're doing. People are, they're waiting for you to fail because they looked at all of this, that people looked at it either one of two ways, that it was the most beautiful love story, or they looked at her as this, scandal-ridden woman who had stolen their king. So she either wanted to play into the idea that, yes, this is a beautiful fairy tale, or you judged me, but you were wrong to do so because look how beautiful I'm pulling this off. She had so much to prove and nothing else to care about. But I just feel exhausted reading about how much she cared. And just the strain of living, like people's praise is going to get you into heaven. Because it's like, why would you ever work this hard for the approval of man? Like, why would you ever care what people think this much? And I guess with the absence of anything meaningful, this is what you have to care about. You have to care what other people think, because if you don't have their approval, what do you have? Literally nothing. But I'm exhausted reading about this. All right, the book takes a bit of a turn. We're going to talk about how did people perceive them? What were people talking about when they were with them? And we get most of this next section is from the vantage point of a young diplomat named Valentine Lawford. And he is interesting in his description of them. He found them to be very alluring, and he very much enjoyed that somehow he got pulled into their orbit. Being a young diplomat, he was surprised that he was sort of invited in. Probably he was invited in because they could shape his perception of them. He was somebody who was young enough that they could decide what he would think of them, and maybe they felt like he wasn't so entrenched in one idea or the other, that here was a young thing who could say good words about them. I don't know why he was invited, but anyway, he wrote to his mother a lot, and we get a lot of primary source from Valentine Lawford. In October of 1938, Valentine Lawford, a young diplomat at the Paris embassy, wrote to his mother, "Last night I had quite a historic time, as I was asked to a musical evening at Elsie Mendel's, and found on my arrival with the dessert the men of the party sitting around the table being held forth to by the Duke of Windsor." He continued, "His Royal Highness was in a marvelous mood, and he made me come and sit beside him and tell him every detail of my rather humdrum life. After we moved out of the dining room, he told me to come and sit by him on the sofa in a corner of one of the rooms, and there we sat for half an hour, while he held forth on politics and pumped me all that time about what the younger generation thought about everything. He's very Nazi in his ideas, and he seems to have a horror of Bolshevism. He was quite charming to talk to and obviously means well, though I think he's very wrong-headed and prejudiced for all his experience. Of course, he wanted to know what the FO thought about Chamberlain's foreign policy, of which he entirely approves. But please keep the Windsor dope to yourselves. People talk so much that I might get back to His Royal Highness that a certain third secretary had said that he was a Nazi, etc. Let's just break that down, shall we? Don't you find it very interesting that he was invited to Elsie Mendel's house? Now, look, I don't know the background of this young Valentine. I don't know what his dealing was. I don't know what was happening with him. I think it's interesting that he was invited. I think it's interesting that as he comes in, David immediately calls him over and wants to hear all about his life and just, tell me everything, and just gives him a ton of attention, knowing that attention from, even though he's not king any longer, he's probably the most important person in that room, the most connected person in that room, to have that guy call you over, want to hear all about it, and then be like, you move to another room, and he's like, no, stay with me, come on, sit down, let's keep talking. Can you imagine how intoxicating that would be to have all that attention? And I'm not even bringing sexuality into this. I'm just saying, one human to another, to have somebody who is of vast importance next to your, lowly third secretary identity would be pretty enormously interesting. And definitely something to write home to mother about, I will say. But, and again, this is not necessarily true, just thoughts. What do you think Valentine's deal was? Do you think perhaps he had been brought in specifically for the Duke on a multitude of other levels? Do you know what I'm saying? Because I think it's odd that he would be invited and that the Duke would even take note of him. Unless the Duke's just this super lovely, wildly wonderful, warm person who, if a new face shows up, he will immediately make sure that that person is, bring him into the fold, sit down and talk. Some people are like that. Some people are really good at making every new face they see feel like the only face in the room to that person, I think that that is a beautiful character trait. And it is possible that that's who the Duke was. But is it probable? I don't know. Anyway, let's continue. Lawford, then in his late 20s, became a regular part of the Windsors and Mendel's entourage, not surprisingly. On February 1st, 1939, he described a film viewing that included Somerset Maugham's wife, Siri, among the guests. It was amusing to see His Royal Highness watching his great-grandparents game bowling around Balmoral, and he seemed to enjoy it. We went back after to supper at Elsie's, where the Duke spoke fluent Spanish and became quite jolly. All right, I'm just going to pump the brakes real quick. What does this remind you of? Do you guys remember in the last book that we read, Revenge, when Harry and Meghan were invited over to somebody's house who was trying to make a deal with them, and they sat and they watched episodes of The Crown, and then Harry kind of got off on telling everybody it's actually way worse than that, and you have no idea, let me tell you how it really was. And remember how he just loved to be kind of the center of attention and give the details, the true details of the whole thing. Well, I just think it's weird that you'd ever go to somebody's house and then they would put on a film that had to do with your actual family. And that same thing is happening here, in that they are all viewing footage of the British royal family sort of, walking around Balmoral and all this. I don't know what the whole film was. I cannot imagine putting on home videos of somebody else's family for them to watch at my house. That's a weird thing to do. But in the same way that Harry enjoyed that, so did His Royal Highness, because it reminds him, yeah, those are my people. I am part of that big clan that is, running the show over there. And enjoying being tethered again to that identity and to that power. And I feel like even though Harry was degrading it in his experience, he enjoyed the fact that he had the inside scoop. And even though David here is no longer part of that landscape, he enjoys the fact that everyone knows those are his people. Okay, back to the book. Now, Valentine is becoming more and more enmeshed in their inner circle. And his original letter where he's well, I think that David's a little bit of prejudiced and wrong-headed and kind of a Nazi. He's sort of being taken in by them at this point. He writes, the Windsors were very kind and nice and jolly the other night, and I had quite a heart-to-heart to talk with the Duchess. We dined at Maxim's, where we were joined by Alexander Metcalf, and the Duke found that the orchestra got in the way of his talking. He talks a great deal. So we left Maxim's and then we drove back to their house on the boulevard. The house is so far only half furnished, but it looks as if it would eventually be extremely pleasant. High rooms with tall windows and, of course, beautiful furniture. Now, this is where it gets weird, because after they leave the restaurant because the music is too loud, and after they get over to the house, they don't just sit in the living room and talk. For whatever reason, young Valentine is being shown the bedrooms and the en-suites and everything. And I think that if I was going to bring somebody over to my house, I mean, unless I just had this sprawling mansion, I guess, and if they wanted to see it, I might show them. But I've always found house tours to be exceedingly strange, because why are you showing me everybody's bedrooms? And why am I looking in your bathroom? I don't care what's going on in the master bedroom, hardly. And so I think to be shown all this stuff is weird, and it just seems like a display of wealth that I don't understand. Okay. But anyway, young Valentine's getting the full tour. And he said, the Duke's bedroom is also empire, darkish red and gold, and he has a passion for little helmets. His chairs have helmets at both corners of the back, and his bedside clock is enclosed in a helmet of metal and mother of pearl. His bed, on which was laid out the royal pajamas and dressing gown, is also empire, dark red. The Duchess has a bedroom of very dark blue and white. I can't help feeling that he is sadly wasted. But the Duchess said they were in no hurry to go back to England if they weren't wanted. I'm dining on Saturday at the Ritz with Lady Bertha Mickleham, when the Windsors will be her guests of honor. I don't seem to be able to get out of their orbit, but I must admit that I honestly enjoy being with them both. His Royal Highness is plain-spoken, simple and straightforward, and she's marvelously good company. I think this is all very interesting. Why couldn't he get out of their orbit? Was it that he just kept being included, or that he didn't want to be out of it? He wasn't declining, but it does seem that everybody who was associated with him wanted him to be with them. And I wonder what that was about. We are given no hints. Nothing is told of us in any of the footnotes. I don't know who he was or why they cared about who he was. Maybe they'll tell us some more later. But on this bit where he says that he finds that he's enjoying them more and more, and that His Royal Highness is plain-spoken and straightforward, and she's marvelously good company, I think what he was enjoying was the fact that they were so unlike their contemporaries. I think that the Duke and the Duchess decided how it was going to be, and then they did it their own way, and I think that there were conventions that they had bucked together as a couple that they were just going to continue to buck. And I think that probably people enjoyed them because they did things the way they wanted to do them. And yet they weren't distasteful about it. In the sense that, they always looked very put together. They always had very regal bearing. They weren't crass about the fact that they were going to do it their own way. And I think that really differs in the way that a lot of, not just Harry and Meghan, but I think that there's a lot of celebrities that try to be likable and relatable, but they do it in such a crass way that eventually it stops being charming, that they are being so open and transparent about things. Because at a certain point, it's like, all right, well, we didn't need to know all that. And you know who I think of really specifically when I say this? This is really just a random tangent, but I'll take it anyway. Do you guys remember when Jennifer Lawrence came on the scene? And everybody thought that she was just, people loved her because she's very, she's very likable. She's very knowable. There's not a lot of pretense to her. She'll sit at, she's self-deprecatory. And so people really liked her. They felt like this was a real person. This wasn't a celebrity who only knew how to say their lines and that was really awkward in interviews. Jessica Lawrence was always fun to watch in interviews. And so I feel like people they always took to her because they felt like what they were seeing was like a real person. When in reality, I think that she is really good at playing the real person. And she at a certain point crossed the line from being relatable to being crass, because that seemed like the most relatable thing. When you're with your friends, you can just let your hair down and just say crazy stuff. And I think that that's kind of how she is. And I feel like people became less and less enamored with her brand of normal, because it stopped being so normal and started to be like, okay, now you're just trying to get us to like you because you'll say things other people won't say. That is the modern day desire for people to like you. You just say, well, you'll just be wild and you'll just say whatever. I think that Wallace and David, I think they were really good at being enviable in their lifestyle choices and in the way they carry themselves, while still being really relatable in their conversation. So David would just say, how it is. He was very plain spoken, and in the inner circle, people really liked that he would just, make a decision that this orchestra's too loud. I want to keep talking. Let's go. He didn't, what he wanted to do, he did. What he wanted to say, he said. At a dinner party, he would say whatever. When it came talking to politics, he spoke boldly and in generalities, and he would make people laugh. And so I think that because he seemed fairly comfortable with himself, made other people comfortable. Same with Wallace. She was a really, really excellent hostess. Everyone will say that about her. I've never heard one person, and anybody who can deride her about everything else, everyone says that she was excellent company, very good conversationalist, wonderful hostess. Those were where her gifts lay. And so, they were both very good at talking to people and sort of like making them feel important. So I think that's where the line differs between modern relatable and this kind of relatable that was being displayed here. There was still a veneer of beauty and standard, whereas now I think relatable means I'm sloppy, I say whatever, I do whatever, I'm crass. People don't want that. They want it like a little bit. They like it a little bit at first, but then after a while it's like, but there's nothing to attain here. Like when I listen to you, like there's nothing that makes me want to sort of better myself, like to be more like that, because I think initially that's what we like about relatability, is that we find connection in it, but then we're also like, I want to be like that. Like, I like the way the person made me feel. Like, I like that they were open and honest, and I want to be a person that goes through the world and connects to people like that. And I think that what we're lacking now is people can be relatable, but then they're kind of gross. And I think that with Wallace and David, they were relatable, but also very regal. So it's like they had the whole package. Okay, that was a huge tangent. I'm sorry. Let's go back to what we were doing. Now, the book takes another turn. Do you remember last chapter we were talking about Moroni? Remember, she was the maid that came and said, I have all these papers on the fact that David's having a relationship with his male cousin, Philip of Hesse, and Moroni had disappeared. And then she's resurfaced. So let's find out what's going to happen with that. In the spring of 1939, the Duke's blackmailer again popped up, writing to him from the Ritz Hotel. Davy dear, this is what she wrote. Last month, Mother gave me the documents concerning my birth. These documents are now in safety with those concerning my relations with you. They can be produced at your request. Neither has consented to give us the chance to solve our problem by ourselves. Thus, until the middle of May, I shall then rely entirely on her. I shall ask a solicitor to manage an interview between you and I, or with your entourage, unless you would prefer to give me an answer either by letter or by telephone. Alexandra. I don't know what in the world she's talking about. I cannot make heads or tail of this. Now, the Duke wrote, I know Walter Monckton has communicated with you regarding the files of the woman named Moroni, and I enclose one of the 2 supplicant letters that she's written under the signature Alexandra from the Ritz Hotel in Paris, wrote the Duke to his solicitor George Allen a few days later. You will remember, he continues, that she was expelled from France upon a year ago, and this is the first notification that I have, even the French police have had of her return to France. I had our detective communicate with Monsieur Pierre, informing him of Moroni's presence in Paris. And he has reported to me this evening that he understands that the woman is getting 1 month's imprisonment for entering the country while being the subject of an expulsion order, and will then be deported again. So he's having all of his drama and problems. Moroni's shown back up even though she'd been expelled from the country. She keeps writing her little coded letters about, I have these documents, Mother gave me these, well, and it's all cloak and daggers. I mean, I don't know what Moroni's banging on about. And again, we don't know all the papers that she had because it's all been smuggled here, smuggled there, and then disappeared after World War II. Again, like I said last time, there are people who did see these documents who can now say, yeah, I saw those documents. They were talking about him and Philip of Hesse having a sexual relationship. And, the Duke being entangled in a lot of political and questionable engagements, particularly with the Nazis. But we have never seen these letters, and Maroney is certainly not making herself clear in this little sample. So I don't really know what the deal with Maroney was. But while David's having all his problems, Wallace is over there having her own affair. Now, of course, we knew that Wallace was having affairs. That's nothing new. But it's just distasteful that she would even think that at this point of her life that she can continue on with this, salacious behavior, because she just made the king abdicate. I guess she feels like it's owed to her because she didn't want him to do it, and she had told him time and time again, let's not do this. I don't want to get married. What are you talking about? But now, I guess she's like, well, I guess I'll just live the rich lifestyle and just do my own thing on the side. And the affair was supposedly with Chips Channon. Now, we've heard his name come up time and time again. He's always referred to as that diarist. And I think it would be very interesting to be known as somebody who kept a diary, and that, he exposed all these things in his diary. I'm sure he was more than that. In fact, I know he was. He was the American ambassador in Paris, but often he is referred in this book as the diarist. So anyway, we've got a lot we can learn from old Chip. There were rumors that he was having an affair with Wallace Simpson. And Chips Channon degraded the whole thing as just lunatic gossip from a certain woman who he refers to as that lunatic Mrs. Corey. But other people also spoke of it and knew of it. And apparently this is how it went down. The Duke would escort his wife to one of the dress designers for fittings and return for her after an hour or two. Wallace would slip out the back door for a rendezvous with the ambassador. As the British Secret Service was guarding both Windsors, this affair was reported to their government. The British were afraid that the prince might find out and there would be a great scandal. So the Secret Service was protecting Wallace's transgressions from the Duke. Sordid little affair, isn't it? All of this is very weird, very odd. And it just continues to show that Wallace is going to do her own thing, her own way. She's going to continue to find people who make her feel alive by paying attention to her. She couldn't have felt very alive when all she does is go and visit antique shops and, keep it up, an eagle eye on the ledger and the financials, and, breathe down the neck of the French chef and constantly be changing outfits 1,000 times a day. All of those are very trite and unimportant things to concern yourself with. And she must have felt just like life was beyond dull. But now, here she is paying all this close attention to this Chips Channon and, lying to the Duke and going and saying, well, I have a dress fitting, but really she's sneaking out the back door. I mean, tawdry. And all of it's a fantasy. Every part of her life is a fantasy. The affairs she's having are fantasy. She's building fantasies with those people, living and pretending that she is some kind of a queen, a fantasy. Everything in her life is based on what can I get people to believe is true about me. And it's all just very, very sad and just very, I just wonder, like, at the end of her life, what did she have to show for what she had done with all of them? And what was she planning on feeling? Like, what legacy was she trying to leave? Has she ever thought about what will people know me as, or what will my family remember me as? And I know she didn't have like kids and stuff, and so maybe that led her to feel like she didn't have anything she needed to hand down to anybody because there wasn't anybody who would be taking on the mantle. But it just seems like just a very depressing and discouraging lifestyle. Excuse the wardrobe change. Yesterday when I was filming, I always film in the mornings, and then little babies came downstairs and wanted their breakfast, so I went upstairs. So I had to finish the chapter today. But anyway, to follow up what we were talking about. So while Wallace is going and having all of these dresses made, and she's going to the dress shop, and she's, acting like she's getting fitted, she's really sneaking out the back door. And meanwhile, we've got the Duke also acting in ways that are just further embarrassing to them as a couple. Now, her playing around was known but not known. The Duke didn't know, and they were, like the text says, that they were Secret Service were actively covering for him, but the women in their social circle knew it was happening. They're kind of embarrassing themselves sort of locally and in their social circle, but on a grander scale, the Duke was in the middle of embarrassing himself and really upsetting his family. So the book goes on to say that there was to be a further embarrassment the following month, with perceptions of the Duke upstaging his brother and interfering in politics. "I see in the news bulletin today that David's going to broadcast to America this evening," wrote Queen Elizabeth to Queen Mary. "How troublesome of him to choose such a moment." At the invitation of a friend, Fred Bate of NBC, the Duke had agreed to make an appeal for peace from Verdun in the belief that only American intervention could prevent a war. Attempts by friends, such as Lord Beaverbrook, not to go ahead were ignored. And listen to what David has to say as his defense for why he thought that this was just completely and totally, okay, it's not a big deal, everyone needs to stop, giving me the side eye for wanting to have my opinion. And this is his very flimsy response to what is so obviously him trying to re-enter the public and political conversation. He says, "For 2.5 years I've deliberately kept out of public affairs, and I still propose to do so. I speak for no one but myself, without the previous knowledge of any government. I simply speak as a soldier of the last war, whose most earnest prayer is that such a cruel and destructive madness shall never again overtake mankind." See, that sounds very noble, but my problem is this. Am I misrecollecting that he was not part of World War I? I mean, as the Crown Prince, wasn't he removed from the fray there? I don't recall that he was actually a soldier in the First World War, but even put that to the side, say like that was true. This foolishness of thinking that you can come out and speak, as an individual, that he says, "I speak for no one but myself without the previous knowledge of any government." But you do have previous knowledge of other government, but you have been in political situations, but you do know the conversations going on behind closed doors. That's the problem. You don't get to be an individual anymore. You don't get to say now, well, it's in my own private capacity. This is the same, crazy BS line that he used when he said, well, I'm talking to Hitler, and I'm going to visit the Nazis, but I'm going in my private capacity. This has nothing to do with the fact that I used to be the crown prince and once the king. Nothing to do with that whatsoever. But the problem is that is who you are. And even if you aren't currently acting in that role, that's how the world perceives you. So if you're just like I'm just Joe Blow with my opinion, well, nobody cares about Joe Blow and his opinion. So that if you were just truly, just the local yokel who wanted to get on the radio and have his say, no one would care. It's precisely because your previous connections to government that we even want to hear what you have to say. So enough of this foolishness, And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of soldiers from the First World War who could have gotten on the radio and had their say, and it might have been interesting. But still people would not have tuned in like they're going to tune in to the former king of Great Britain. So enough of this already, trying to act like, why does everyone care? Why can't I have my opinion? You weren't born into being able to just, come and go as you please. And everyone should just let you come when you want to come and go when you want to go, and no one's allowed to have an opinion. It's just not a possibility for you. But to compound his foolishness, the king and queen had just left to go on a goodwill tour to America, so he's totally hedging in on their visit. Why in the world would he be sending a radio address to America when he has he doesn't live there? His wife's American, but it's not like he's got a ton of connections in America. It's not like, that's kind of like his, home away from home. The very fact that he would choose this time to, give his radio address and, say his piece about why he thinks America needs to enter the war, right when his brother is going to have his goodwill tour. And we recall that David also was supposed to have a tour in America that fell apart when Bedeau was unable to help him out and arrange that tour, and that tour all fell apart. So it's almost like now that his brother is successfully having a tour there, the one that David had wanted, now he wants to just hedge in and get his little word in, Don't forget about me. I have opinions too. Well, That's great. Why don't you go play some more tennis and golf and talk to your friends about what your opinions are? The rest of the world, we don't care. We've moved on. Regardless, he chose to do it anyway. But it was unfortunate timing too, because there were really strong isolationist sentiments at that time. And then, of course, Canada, whose unity was threatened by the French-Canadian separatist movement and the abdication, really didn't need the further complication of a visiting king and then his little, his brother yakking in the background. Just let the king and queen go have their goodwill tour without trying to muck it up. The book goes on to say that the BBC refused to broadcast the talk, but it made a huge impact in America, with a copy of the text inserted into the proceedings of Congress. And the Duke received hundreds of letters of support from, amongst others, Marie Stopes, John Foster Dulles, and Lord Alfred Douglas, although his position was slightly undermined when it was revealed he had dined earlier that week with Count Johannes von Velchek, the German ambassador to France and a long-standing friend. At the very least, it was seen as yet another attempt to upstage his younger brother. Yeah, you can't go on and have this conversation and broadcast this talk and say, America is our only hope to fight against the rising power of Nazi Germany, and America needs to enter the fray. And then be like, but also I'm going to, hang out with my German ambassador friends and just, go eat lunch. It just doesn't make it seem like you really are invested in what it is that you're trying to say. If you're just still super chummy with what you call this opposing power. Nothing from his life has shown to us thus far that he would consider Germany to be an opposing power that should be avoided. And so it feels like for him to interject himself into the conversation now is real phony. It's real phony baloney is what it is. And particularly at the time when his brother's trying to have his goodwill tour in America, it just seemed like he wanted to hedge in. Okay, so international tensions are increasing. The Windsors decide to go to their summer home in LaCroix. Their first guest was this author who was bringing his book that the Duke had assisted on. And you remember that at the beginning of this particular book we're reading, somebody had approached the Duke and said, hey, let's write a book about everything that's happened so you can really tell us your side of the story. And he had at the time been like, well, it sounds good, but maybe I better lay low for a second. Well, his days of laying low are over. Now, he had made several attempts to control the narrative by helping out on other books. And he had even gone so far as to seek legal action against one particular book that had been written about him without his consent or without his input. The book was called Coronation Commentary, in which it had been suggested that he and Wallace had been sleeping together before they got married. Obviously. And, he takes legal action against that. Which it just seems so dumb. I mean, it's just like, do you really think that any of us out here think that you two at this stage in your life, you two grown adults who have had many, many, many sexual relationships, drew the line at being intimate together before your marriage? And you guys were fine with cheating on spouses and stuff like that. But like, what were you going to do? Just like sit on the couch and cuddle? Like, what are you talking about? Of course you did. It's just like, what a dumb thing to be like, that didn't happen. It's like, no, it didn't. Anyway, the world's crumbling, but the Duke's over there still super hyper concentrated on his life, what's going on with him, the books that are being written about him. Meanwhile, he's got all his friends coming over to his place and having, parties where, say, a dozen Highland pipers and dancers are invited to give a display led by the Duke in his full Highland kit. I mean, just playing. They're just playing all day long. All day, it's just a show. All day, it's entertainment after entertainment. It's a very flimsy life. The Duke still felt that the war could be averted because, as we've already stated, he is the dictator whisperer. And all it takes is for him to say one little word to Hitler, and then suddenly Hitler's going to come crawling to him on hand and knees, apologizing for even considering the idea of taking over the world. Remember, he said that, if I was still on the throne, I could have steered him clear. I could have shown him the way. I could have had a personal meeting with him, and then everything would have been, everything would have righted itself had I been given the opportunity to have my say. Well, he wasn't given the opportunity to have a face-to-face meeting, so he went the next best route and sent a telegram. Listen to this. Like, who would even care? Like, if you were Hitler, you're over there planning and preparing, You're prepping a military, you've got all, a million moving pieces that you're in charge of. And then you get this little telegram. This is not going to be the arrow that pierces your heart and, sends you to your knees in a spasm of conviction. The telegram says, remembering your courtesy in our meeting 2 years ago, I addressed to you my entirely personal, simple though very earnest appeal for your utmost influence towards a peaceful solution of the present problems. That is like so much word salad, And I feel like just yet one more time where he's interjecting himself into the public conversation, yet he need not bother. Nobody cares what you think, David. And 6 days later, Hitler deigns to reply and says, assure you that attitude towards England remains the same, and my wish to avoid a new war between our two countries remains. It depends, however, on England, whether relations between the Germans and the English can find the correct channel. Such a non-committal response. But it's like, what did David think was going to be said? What could David possibly have thought Hitler was going to say? Oh, now that you mention it, I guess I should try to avoid this. Throughout August, amidst concerns that they might be kidnapped, they carried on. It's like, oh, we might be kidnapped, but we do have a whole floor full of secretaries and detectives. They're on it. Walter Monckton liaisoned with Sir Horace Wilson about arrangements for the couple's return to Britain, which included sending a plane to bring them back. On September 2nd, Fruity Metcalf, who had spent the summer at LaCroix with his wife and son David, who was the Duke's godson — the Duke's got more godsons than God himself — arranged for the Windsor staff to take the train to Paris. Now, Monckton's been working his little fingers to the bone, trying to arrange a way for David and Wallace to come back, especially because we're on the brink of a war. Let's bring our people back. Let's not leave them to be consumed by this war that's just right on the horizon. Let's bring them back to the fold. So he's got all his friends working double time. And the book doesn't say whether David asked for it explicitly. We do know, though, that they were all trying to make arrangements to bring them back and arranging planes and trains and all of this. But then at the 11th hour, Monckton was forced to call the other friends who had been in on the plan and just say, it's not going to happen. And this is why. Monckton reported that the Duke said that unless his brother was ready to have him and his wife to one of their houses, they would not return to England. Great pity the difficult arrangements on which we've all worked so hard should have broken down. They'll be difficult to rearrange when all are desperately busy on war preparations. In my case, I had given up chance of seeing my son today before he leaves. That is a heart-wrenching last line there, that he had spent all this time trying to arrange things for David, and that right there he had hoped to say goodbye to his son, who I'm assuming was leaving for war, potentially. He says, in my case, I'd given up a chance of seeing my son today before he leaves. Right on the heels of talking about the fact that there's all these war preparations going on. He's been so busy trying to help David, get David back home, get David's staff back to England, get David safe. And then at the 11th hour, David's like, I don't think so. No. If I can't stay at one of my brother's houses, just forget about it. No. It's not good enough. And it's like, do you understand that everybody is always working for you and your pursuits and your goals and what you want? Over and over and over in this book, that's the theme. Everybody laying down their time at the feet of David, and then David just kicks it. And not even with malice. It doesn't even seem like he's malicious. It just seems like he's so overwhelmingly selfish that he cannot even conceive that this was an inconvenience for anybody. It's like, oh, did you have something else to do? Oh. You mean laying down every moment of your life and missing out on the goodbye of your son was going to be a problem for you? Oh, you should have said something. How was I supposed to know? The next day, war was declared. The Duke's reaction on learning the news from a call from the British Embassy in Paris was to remark to his wife, Great Britain has just declared war on Germany. I'm afraid in the end this may open the way for world communism. He then returned to the swimming pool and dived in. What a pithy, unimportant, uninvested, uninformed little man. We've said it again, and we'll continue to say in the comments, Britain dodged a bullet when he decided to abdicate the throne. He is of so little moral fiber that I just don't know what England would have done if he had been at the helm during World War II. Can you even imagine? I think the world would look completely different if he had been at the helm, because his alliance and his allegiance was not to the British people. It was to some fantasy land that he had, some picture of who he was and what his British/German parentage was and what his identity was. And he just had this entire idea of himself and his relationship to Germany that I don't think would have allowed him to have put his blinders on to his familial allegiance and just been like, I love my family, I don't like what that country's doing, I have to protect my own. But it does. I don't know where his allegiance was in life. What was his North Star? What was his compass? Self. I mean, it has been about himself this entire journey. I don't think we've read one time yet where he put somebody else's needs above his own. This is a shocking character sketch in what life looks like when it is truly all about yourself. Self-care was his number one priority. What do I need to do for myself? How am I going to get through today? You know, what do other people need to do to make sure that I'm getting my cup filled? You know, because I gotta have my cup filled. I gotta have my cup filled. You know, and there's just something to be said for pouring your life out for others and being renewed by what they are receiving from you. It's like you want to fill your cup up, fill other people's cup to overflowing, and it fills your cup back up too. Look, I'm not saying that you can't sometimes look out for what, you know, draw boundaries where it's necessary. Okay, whatever. But I am so done living in a culture in which we all say that, you know, I'm hurting, it's hard, everything's, you know, so difficult, you know, I feel wounded, I feel traumatized, I feel triggered, you know, all this. And it's all so much navel gazing, so much inward looking, just all the day long. You know, what do other people need to do so that I feel seen? You know, I need to go talk to my therapist so that I feel seen. I've got to go talk to my counselor so that, you know, somebody can help me continue to understand me. And it's like, why don't you just put you on the back burner and go help somebody else? And I think that David's life is so depressing because it's always about, what can everybody do for me? What do I need to do for myself? How do I need my house to look so that I'm at peace? What do I need my wife to be doing so that I feel at peace? You know, what do I need all of my servants doing? I need them to look this way. I need my house to look this way. I need to have these activities planned. I need my friends to be doing this. But David, what are you doing for anybody? In this entire book so far, what has he ever done for anybody? I cannot think of a greater life that was wasted in more ways. And I think, well, I say greater not because necessarily he was so great, but the position that he had was so extraordinary. The amount of power he would have had to live a incredibly noble and worthwhile life were extraordinary. He had so much that he could have given. But from what well? What would he have given from? What was his ideology? What was his outlook on life? What was his ethos? Like, what could he have given from who he was? Because I don't think he ever invested anything in who he was. I don't think he knew what was his virtues, what were his morals, what was important to him. I don't know how he could have led, because I don't know what he knew. What he knew was, what do I want? And so he went after that. But like that this whole time, that's his only guiding light. What do I want? I'll go get that. Anyway, this chapter was really interesting. There's just so many parallels to the other couple that we've talked about so many times on this channel. It's extraordinary. All right, well, it was great talking to you. I'll see you next weekend, and we'll talk then. Bye.